Well, joining us in studio to discuss this further is a member of the Gauteng Legislature and DA Shadow MEC for Human Settlements and COGTA, Meryl Serota. On the phone line, we'll be joined by community members Bongani Mabena as well as Duma Kalushe. A very good evening to you all, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, good evening.
Well, let me start off with you, Mervyn. What are your concerns as the opposition party regarding the illegal occupation of RDP housing and the backlog in general that's actually happening?
There's a long history of maladministration in the COGTA and Human Settlements Department in Gauteng. If one looks at the lack of spending, and if the last couple of years there's been no more than 20% of the amount allocated, so much so that money's been returned to the National Treasury. Now that's criminal when you've got 1 million people waiting on the waiting list for housing. There doesn't seem to be a plan. And unfortunately, the MECs for Human Settlements have changed. There's been 3 since I've been there since 2014, and each of them has taken time to get into the flow of things. What we need to see is a recognition that there's a problem. Now, the illegal invasions are a result of many years of frustration, of people waiting and watching unfinished projects across the roads from them, that they've decided to take the law into their own hands. And of course we can't have that. But you can understand the frustration, and something has to be done to put a plan in place that the 1 million people who are waiting have got some kind of vision for the future that gives them a fleck of hope that they will get a house. So what actually is happening on the ground, where you've got these unfinished RDP projects, people are actually vandalizing, stealing the foundations, and the whole project has to begin afresh. So we're going backwards. And with the immigration of up to 10,000 people a month into Gauteng, there's a huge stress on the infrastructure of many of our informal settlements, which have increased and more than doubled since 1994 to nearly 1,000. So you've got a huge problem on the ground, and you have a department led by various MECs who don't seem to have any idea of how to deal with it, because the challenge is so large. There has to be a recognition we have a problem and to put something in place. And the biggest problem that has happened is there's been a lack of communication and consultation with the residents. If you don't talk to the residents and get them on board, they're not going to be part of the process. So we're in a bit of stagnation, and until such time as something happens with a plan that people are buying into, we're going to actually get in a worse situation.
Well, let's actually speak to one of the community members, Duma Kalushe. Very good evening to you, Duma. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Now, are you one of the community members who's waiting for an RDP house, or have you decided to actually occupy one yourself?
Good evening to you and the panelists. I'm still having a problem with that waiting list because of much as it has been alluded that he has been waiting for too long. And now, since that waiting list is still to be finalized, so that now with the changing of the municipality members in terms of the MECs and the MMCs, it is becoming a problem because of now each and every administration that comes on board has its own policies and ways to deal with situations. So now also, as much as the speaker said, the issue of the invasion, it came as a result of people no longer having the interest of waiting for far too long. So then it's up to us as individuals in our respective places to say enough is enough. Because of now, when RDP houses have been built, they've been built for people to occupy in a short nick of time. But now if the administrators, the officials, take money in terms of bribery, in terms of selling those units to other individuals, including those from foreign countries, with the bulk being from Zimbabwe. It's a serious problem. So that now, let's say, people, the very same democracy that we fought for, us as normal citizens, are not benefiting from those freedoms that we fought for. It's a serious problem. So now, I'm still highlighting to the country at large that we should make sure that this corruption ends so that with all benefits in the right way. When they say there's a waiting list, all the necessary officials make sure that they go according to the list as it appears on the list. Then also those who are not being found, when they search for those people, that is when they could say, now the next person will be the one that will benefit.
And Duma, has the government been communicating with you regarding when exactly this list will be finalized? Because you said that different administrations come in and go out, but this waiting list is still there hanging.
Sure. Particularly in Alexandra, people registered for the Flipped program unit. That's the recent one. The people they registered in 2013 as early as February, March, with the notion that said by the end of October, people would be allocated to those units. But up to June 2014, there was nothing that has been tested that people had registered. And out of the people that have registered for 262 units, it was a practical for the but now most of the people said from the CRP.
Duma, I do apologize. I have to let you go. Your phone line is actually a bit bad. We can't hear you very clearly. But that was a community member, Duma Galusha, just highlighting the fact that he is one of those whose names is on a waiting list. And he has been waiting for years for government to actually allocate him an RDP house. But he says that they actually tend to see people who seem to jump the list, jump ahead of those who've been waiting for a longer time. And he feels that there's a lot of corruption going on in government. Just coming back to studio, he also mentioned that some foreigners seem to be getting RDP houses even before citizens. Is it not a priority that citizens be housed before those coming from outside of the country?
Well, I agree, and I've heard that. I haven't seen any documentation to prove that, but there's clearly no process. And this allocation of lists has been a controversy for 10, 15 years. It continues to be a controversy. There's talk of open and transparent lists, which I haven't seen. There's apparently a national list, there's a local list. There's supposed to be a priority for those that have waited since 1996, but nothing seems to be happening. And if I may mention, the gentleman seems to be from Alexandra. Now, in Alexandra, there was a court order that was obtained by the Residents Association that own properties to prevent development of Old Alex until such time as their rights were sorted out. There was a court settlement 2 years ago, and the government was involved, particularly the Gauteng Department of Human Settlements, and nothing has been done since then. Until such time as that is resolved, there's going to be no further development. So it restricts development. More and more people come in, put pressure on the infrastructure, and we just don't seem to be gaining any progress.
And how should the alleged corruption actually be dealt with, I mean, from the government's side as well?
Well, there's a lot of talk about we are going to stop corruption. But you need to put that in place. You need to show the effects of corruption. You need to show that you've got individuals investigating. You need to show that people are being charged. You need to show that people are actually being fined or going to jail. Talk doesn't get you anywhere. You have to show that because people want to see what's happening visibly. Talk doesn't get them anywhere, and if they see visible change and a visible effect, then they have more encouragement going forward.
And also, you mentioned earlier on that there's a lot of people now coming into the country, so it puts a lot of pressure onto the Department of Housing to house all of these people. And also sometimes we find criminal elements creep in. Earlier on, I read in my introduction that some people actually see these RDP houses and go and steal the window framings or steal the doors, or a handle. That's
very prevalent. And the saddest thing is you've got unfinished projects where instead of spending money on trying to redo the development or continue the development, the department has been spending money on security. So there's been a waste of resources. When they move that security away, then very quickly the bricks, the mortar, the window frames and the infrastructure gets destroyed. And I've seen at least 15 developments like that and nothing has been done. And when questions are asked questions in the House, there's been very, very poor responses.
Well, we do actually have Mr. Keith Khoza on the phone line. He is the Gauteng Province's Human Settlements DG. A very good evening to you. Thank you very much for joining us. We heard earlier on from a community member who mentioned that his name is on a waiting list that he has been waiting for quite a number of years. And he's getting frustrated to the point where he understands why people now occupy houses illegally. What can you say to the situation?
Well, the reason why people occupy houses illegally, there are a number of factors that lead to that. There could be, part of the reason would be that the project is still not handed over to the department because it's 90% complete, which means that there's still some 10% outstanding of work to be done in respect of electrification and water supply connections. Two, it could be that with the beneficiary processes, and it depends on the nature of the project. If you look at most of the CRU community residential units, which were built for hostel dwellers, at the time when they were concluded, the intended beneficiaries could not afford the rental for those units. And as part of the negotiations with them, they refused that people be allocated some of these units until we found out an alternative accommodation to them. And that's why most of these structures are still standing empty, because we are trying to avoid a possible conflict between those who may want to move in as part of the rental stock and those that are still waiting for alternative accommodation to be built. So there are a number of reasons why houses are invaded. For instance, if you look at the recent incident in Alexandra, it's a FLIS project where once you complete the unit, you provide the subsidy, but the beneficiary must get an approval from the bank to pay the difference to the developer before the developer can hand over the project to us. Now, during that time, when the negotiations are happening between the beneficiary and the bank, it's likely that the project may be invaded. So there are a number of reasons why these things haven't happened. In some of these instances is when you start looking for beneficiaries, because remember, when you build a project, you attach beneficiaries to it. And at a time when you need to allocate, some of those beneficiaries are not located. You need to look for them, So there are a number of reasons why we end up in the situation we're in.
And also, I'm with the DA Shadow Minister for Human Settlements in studio, and he brought up an issue earlier on about the government spending more money seemingly on security as opposed to completing some of these projects. Can you just respond to that, please?
No, the reason is simple, is that you've got units that are almost complete or completed, and they're still dealing with the issues like, look at the situation in Dube, where no security was appointed by the city of Johannesburg. The project was left unprotected. What happened? It was vandalized. Nobody can stay in that project as a result. So it's millions, hundreds of millions of rands that were wasted simply because there was no security on site.
And just lastly, with regards to the evictions of these people that are occupying these houses illegally, what is the progress on that? And if the people are not evicted, does that not mean that government will not be responsible for actually finding them alternative housing?
No, we are not obliged to find people alternative housing. That is a determination of a court. And the court applies its mind when dealing with such matters. On the situation those people are faced with, there are people that were vulnerable and were legally located in a place. And when you remove those people, the court often requires that to provide alternative accommodation. But when you have illegal activity, as it was in the case in Olive Old Bush, where people simply illegally occupied houses, the court did not rule that those people be given alternative accommodation.
Well, Mr. Khoza, thank you very much for having joined us this evening. That was Keith Khoza, the Gauteng Department, or Gauteng Province, rather's Human Settlements at DG. Come back to studio. Let me just get your closing comments. So you've heard
Can I just comment on what Mr. Khoza said?
Yes.
I go around the province quite extensively on oversights. And some of the areas are so bad, and I say this honestly, the rats have even left because the conditions are so poor. In Alex, you can sit down and a rat will sit on your foot, because that's how close they are to people. And they just bring disease. And unfortunately, what Mr. Khoza has failed to indicate, why are people invading? Why are these areas being vandalized? Because people have nowhere to go, because they are desperate. Give them hope, give them a plan, show them a way to help them in the future. And that's not happening. And they're going to pay dearly at the polls, because there's no plan given. And that's why the EFF have managed to gain a political advantage with this land expropriation situation, because government is not looking after its own citizens. And I'm calling upon the Premier and the MEC to give a plan, to admit where the faults are and give us a plan going forward. Show the residents of Gauteng that you care.
Thank you very much, Mr. Serota, for joining us in studio, and to our guests who had joined us via the phone line. If you want to give your contributions to this conversation, our Twitter handle is @AfroWorldView.